Hi, and welcome back to Heimler's History. In the last few videos, we've been talking about AP World History Unit 6, and we've been focusing specifically on the notion of imperialism, which is where one country brings another country under its own political dominion. And it's true that there was an awful lot of that going on from 1750 to 1900. However, in some cases, imperialism turned out to be more of an economic reality than a political one. And that's called economic imperialism, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Let's get to it. Alright, so economic imperialism. Why don't we begin with a definition? Economic imperialism is a situation in which one country has significant economic power over another country. And for our purposes, we're going to focus on economic imperialism in Asia and Latin America. So let's head on over to Asia and see what's happening there. First, India. Economic imperialism started there with the British East India Company. They established themselves in India in the early 1600s in order to get a slice of that lucrative Indian spice trade. But as I've mentioned in other videos, Britain, not being content with the spice boom, started to exert more and more political dominance over the Indian economy. Specifically, Britain led India into a situation where the majority of their export economy was made up of cotton because Britain needed that cotton to feed their machines. Okay, that's India, but now let's turn our attention to China because in my opinion, China gives us an even better example of economic imperialism. So during this period, the British demanded huge quantities of porcelain, silk, and tea, all from China. So they imported these goods in mass quantities, but as it turns out, the British were more interested in Chinese goods than the Chinese were interested in British goods. And that led to a deep trade deficit on Britain's part, and their stores of silver got way too low for their taste. And so faced with this situation, Britain did what any rational country would do. They got their best minds together to innovate and come up with some great products that the Chinese will love. And if you really believe what I just said, then clearly this is your first time here at Heimler's History, and if so, well, welcome, but that's really not what happened. What really happened is this. The British East India Company forced Indian farmers to start manufacturing opium, which, in case you don't know, is a highly addictive hallucinogenic drug. Opium is the great-grandpappy of heroin, just in case that gives you some idea of how addictive this could be. Not that anyone watching this knows anything about that. Kids, don't do drugs. Anyway, the British began smuggling metric buttloads of opium into China and selling it to the Chinese people, and the more people got addicted, the more opium the British sold. And ladies and gentlemen, that's how you solve a trade deficit. Now, in 1729, the Chinese emperor made the buying and selling of opium illegal, but too many people had come to depend on it by then, and the ban had little effect. But after a century of this, the Chinese grew tired of the abusive situation and rose up against the British in what became known as the Opium Wars. The first iteration of these conflicts began in 1839, and the main goal was for the Chinese to oust the British from their midst. But because the British possessed a superior military due in large part to the Industrial Revolution, they won this series of conflicts. And at the end of the Opium Wars, Britain did not take over China politically, but they did take over economically. And they did that by forcing China to open additional ports of trade to Britain and by requiring a free trade agreement, which of course included opium. Now, this situation became kind of a cautionary tale for the watching world. What it showed is that industrialized nations will crush non-industrialized nations every time. And so seeing this, later in the 1800s, other nations came to China wanting to get their slice of the free trade pie too. But in order to keep from tearing each other apart, they came to an agreement in which they would slice up China into what's called spheres of influence. So Japan, France, Germany, Russia, the United States all got their slice of the pie, and in that slice, or in that sphere, they had exclusive trading rights. Okay, so that's how economic imperialism went down in China. Now let's turn our attention to Latin America and see how it happened there. So in the second half of the 19th century, there was a big imperial interest in Latin America, especially from the United States, Britain, and Spain. And in particular, they were seeking raw materials, low-wage workers, and markets for their goods. So I reckon we ought to start with the United States. America got its big boy imperialistic pants on, starting with the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. Basically, this was President James Monroe's declaration that the lion's share of the Western Hemisphere belonged to the United States, and that European intervention over here was no longer welcome. And the reason why the great American dog was urinating all over the Central American and Caribbean mailbox post was because of the great prosperity and power they had gathered as a result of the Second Industrial Revolution. Now, with all this wealth, the U.S. invested heavily in the industrialization of places like Mexico and Cuba, and the chief object of these investments were railroads and the development of industries like meatpacking, guano extraction, and mining. And why would the United States do all that? Well, not because they were just generous of heart. No, they wanted trading partners, and as a result of all those investments, they got them. Now, Britain handled Argentina similarly. They invested huge sums of money into Argentina, especially in the development of breeding livestock, farming, and railroads. And probably the most significant investment into Argentina was that they helped finance the building of the Port port of Buenos Aires. And again, why would they do that? Well, not because they saw an economy in need and just wanted to help out. No, they did it to facilitate the massive import and export of raw materials and manufactured goods. Now, more briefly, let's talk about Spain's economic imperialism in Chile. Chile at this time was a colonial holding of Spain, and initially Chile's economy was almost entirely dependent on agricultural exports to Spain. However, once copper was discovered in huge quantities in the Chilean hillside, it became a big part of Chile's export economy. Eventually, copper made up a third of all exports from Chile. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is economic imperialism. Alright, that's Unit 6, Topic 5 of AP World History. If you need help getting an A in your class and a 5 on your exam in May, then check out Review Packet right here. If you want me to keep making videos to help you out, then subscribe and come along. And finally, if you liked this video, there's a little like button down there that will help you express your pleasure. Heimler out.